Sony's PlayStation 2 was their second entry into the console market. Released on March the 4th, 2000 in Japan, and then October the 26th in North America, and then in Europe on the 24th of November, the PlayStation 2 sold out instantly on its release. Released a year earlier than Nintendo's GameCube and Microsoft's Xbox, the PlayStation 2 is undoubtedly one of the best-selling gaming consoles of all time and the best-selling gaming console of the 6th generation. Sony would finally discontinue the PlayStation 2 console in 2013, making the console on par with Sega's Master System as the console that was longest supported by its manufacturer, which is an incredible achievement when you consider that the PlayStation 2's lifecycle includes the PlayStation 3 launch and the PlayStation 4 launch. With the PlayStation 2 having the largest console base by far, more so than any other console before it, the PlayStation 2 had one of the largest gamer libraries ever. Capitalising on the PlayStation 2's success, the PlayStation 2's library would include varying genres from virtually every gaming publisher and developer out there. This means that regardless of your taste in games, whether it be niche games or action games, you are bound to find a PlayStation 2 title which suits your gaming interests. While the PlayStation 2 had the strongest third-party publisher support of any other console of that generation, the PlayStation 2's third-party titles were undoubtedly some of the weakest ports of that particular game. Probably one of the best examples of lazy programming for a PlayStation 2 version of a game would be Max Payne, the original first release for the PlayStation 2. Now when you compare this to the version released on the Xbox console, the PlayStation 2 version runs like absolute dog shit. Another multi-platform game which wasn't given much love on the PlayStation 2 when it was in the development process would be Splinter Cell Double Agent. Now there was also an Xbox version of this game released, but the differences between the two versions, the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox versions, are quite interesting. When you take into account that the Xbox version has larger levels, better lighting effects and more content, The PlayStation 2 version doesn't have any of this, and it even has some freezing issues and some major bugs, which makes the game nigh on unplayable for some gamers. Another interesting fact is that when you take into account, back in the day, usually the PlayStation 2 and Xbox versions of the same game were priced equally. So in turn, you were getting less for your money, while the Xbox version had more content and was the better version of that particular game. The majority of gaming developers stated that Sony's architecture for the PlayStation 2 was incredibly difficult to program for, so this may explain why there were so many lazy ports on that particular system, even though it had a very big install base. But on the other hand, when you take into consideration that you've got games like R-Type Final and God of War, which look absolutely fantastic on the PlayStation 2 console, as well as the Gran Turismo series, it really does look like lazy programming that's more at fault than the PlayStation 2 console itself. Saying that, the majority of multi-format titles for the PlayStation 2, Xbox and GameCube, you'll find that 90% of the time, Xbox and GameCube versions of a particular multi-format game will always run and look better than the PlayStation 2 counterpart. And what I mean by this is that the PlayStation 2 versions of these multi-format titles may have a lower screen resolution than the Xbox version and the GameCube version. There was some sloppily converted NTSC to PAL versions of some games, especially ones which were originally released in Japan and then quickly ported over to PAL systems. Usually this wouldn't be a problem, but the PlayStation 2 isn't import friendly. For example, the original Xbox didn't have a region lock on its games. It was up to publishers to decide on whether they wanted to lock their games to that particular region. The PlayStation 2, however, every game is region locked to that particular territory, so you will need to either modify a PAL console to play NTSC games or import a Japanese console to play a Japanese exclusive game. The majority of PAL conversions from NTSC regions were poorly programmed. For example, the majority of PAL games won't give you the option of 50 or 60 Hz, so they'll be poorly programmed and may run slower than the NTSC counterparts. And also, the majority of PlayStation 2 games fall into the category of being cursed with some nasty jagged edges. Some developers stated that anti-aliasing was just not possible on the PlayStation 2's hardware, but if you look at games like Baldur's Gate, Dark Alliance, you'll see that it runs very smooth, 60 frames per second, and has no jagged edges. It looks fantastic. Another great looking PlayStation 2 game would be Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2, released in 2002. The PlayStation 2 version of this game runs absolutely flawlessly. It's got the best track design, it's got the best graphical effects, and it has more content than the Xbox version and the GameCube version. While the majority of these multi-format titles for the PlayStation 2 are perfectly playable and acceptable by some console gamers standards, the majority of console gamers and collectors out there may want to opt for the Xbox versions or the GameCube versions of a particular game, and this may explain why that in today's market the majority of multi-format titles in the 6th generation of consoles tend to be more expensive for the original Xbox and the GameCube. They are obviously more desirable and they are the better versions of these multi-format games. The PlayStation 2's library is so big and vast that even when you take out the third-party games, the PlayStation 2's second-party and first-party titles are absolutely fantastic. The following games are some of the best PlayStation 2 titles I have played over the years, and these are all exclusive to the PlayStation console. Games such as Persona 3, God of War, Ratchet & Clank, Primal, The Getaway, Virtual Fighter 4, iCore, Shadow of the Colossus, Gran Turismo 4, We Love Katamari, God Hand, SOS, The Final Escape, R-Type Final, Thunder Force 6, Frequency, Music 3000, Sly Cooper, Jak and Daxter, Disgaea, Gradius 5, Front Mission 4, Gitaroo Man, and Odin Sphere. All of these games were exclusive to the PlayStation 2 format at the time. They were not released on PC, GameCube, or even on the original Xbox. This is only a very small selection of some of the exclusive PlayStation 2 games that I have played over the years. All of these titles vary a wide range of different genres, which is something the original Xbox was certainly lacking. It didn't have any Japanese RPGs and very few shoot 'em ups. The PlayStation 2 hardware received many different revisions and limited edition spin-offs. The console also saw a prolific release in Japan 2003 when Sony released the PSX. This was a digital video recorder with a built-in hard drive. This console was able to tune in your TV and able to record TV directly to the console itself. The PSX was also going to be fully compatible with the PlayStation Portable that was due to be released in 2004. The PSX wasn't branded by Sony as a PlayStation console, it was focused as a media device. It was designed to compete with other home media systems at that time, but the high price and the poor sales didn't see the console last very long, and it was only in production up until 2005. If you are after one of these rare consoles, prepare to pay at least $450 for one, and that is for a second-hand machine. Prices do fluctuate all the time, as they do on the internet, but either way, prepare to pay quite a heavy price for a PSX console complete in its box. From the year 2000 all the way up until 2004, Sony produced the original fat PlayStation 2 console. Now, there were many different colour and hardware variations within those years, but all of these consoles come with the two main controller ports, two memory card ports, an AV out, an expansion bay, a digital out, and also a power input. During this time, some of the more desirable PlayStation 2 consoles were released in Europe and in Japan. The most prolific were the automotive special editions. Each colour was limited to 666 each, so they are highly collectible and desirable in today's market. There is also some very obscure Japanese editions. These also go for an equally high price due to the short manufacturing run. From 2004 onwards, Sony would produce the slimline PlayStation 2 variant. Now, this PlayStation 2 came with a built-in modem which was missing from the original PlayStation 2, but it didn't include the hard drive. So if you purchased any games that required the hard drive to work, they would be useless on a slimline PlayStation 2. In my own personal opinion, I do think that Sony didn't really see enough sales to warrant the continuation of hard drive support. Potentially it could split the market in half. The majority of gamers out there don't necessarily like buying add-ons for games, and the majority of games that were available for the PlayStation 2 don't require hard drive support, so hence it is not available or supported in the slimline console itself. In today's market, if you wish to pick up an old fat PlayStation 2 console, they go for as little as £10 each. If you are after a slimline console, £15 to £20, and brand new sealed PlayStation 2 consoles can go for as little as £40 to £50 each. It all depends on the seller and where you buy it from. If you are one of the small minority of PlayStation 2 owners out there who have still got a large fat PlayStation 2 console with the added on hard drive, it is possible to modify your hard drive to play emulated and homebrew games. In the early 2000s, Sony actually released a Linux-based operating system just for the PlayStation 2. Now, this does require a lot of know-how, as it is a little bit awkward to do depending on what hardware revision your PlayStation 2 has, but it is still possible to modify your PlayStation 2 to play games that it was never originally intended to do. In addition, if you are into homebrew games and console emulation, I would always recommend the original Xbox as my first choice. But if the PlayStation 2 is your next option, then it's well worth checking out, as the homebrew scene for Sony's PlayStation 2 console is still very much active. While the PlayStation 2 has the reputation in the gaming industry for being the best selling video game console of all time, it also has the reputation among gamers for being one of the most unreliable consoles of all time. Just like any other electronic piece of equipment, the PlayStation 2 may have some components that will fail over time, but ever since its initial release, the PlayStation 2 was notorious for having discs that just simply couldn't be read. The PlayStation 2's library had two different types of media format. You had the compact discs, which had the blue dye, and then you had the DVDs, which had the silver dye on them. The majority of gamers out there had the misconception that the blue discs were causing the problem, but the discs weren't actually causing the problems. It was the optical drives which were the main issue. Sony had used cheap components inside of its PlayStation 2 console. These optical drive issues lasted for years, and it got so bad that Sony had to go to court to settle a lawsuit. The majority of gamers who had the original large fat PlayStation 2s had this problem the most. Gamers were greeted with the message of a disk read error, or the PlayStation 2's dashboard notifying the gamer that their PlayStation 2 disc that they actually inserted is not a PlayStation 2 disc. But in today's age, thankfully, it's very easy to correct this issue with a little know-how and a quick Google search. So if you have this problem, it shouldn't be too long until you have a working PlayStation 2 console. In conclusion, the PlayStation 2 is an excellent gaming machine, and you can see why it shifted so many units. There is a lot of crap and there is a lot of good games in there to balance the good and bad out. It's all down to personal preference. The games make the console worthwhile, not the other way around, but some people out there can't see past the brand loyalty. The PlayStation 2 was the lead console for multi-format development. The majority of games created during that generation were designed with the PlayStation 2's hardware restrictions in mind, purely just so they could get the games to run on that machine. Sony's console had bad, if next to no, anti-aliasing, which led to some jagged edges and shimmering. Widescreen support in the majority of PlayStation 2 games was pretty laughable, and it led to some stretch images on widescreen TVs. Texture mapping and filtering was usually of low quality, and the vast majority of PlayStation 2 games only ran in 480i in comparison to the same game released on the Xbox console. Games such as Crash Bandicoot, Tag Team Racing and Marvel Ultimate Alliance, these games both run in 720p, whereas on the PlayStation 2 they are only in 480i. Plus, when you take into account that the majority of people these days have only LCD, LED and plasma TVs, the PlayStation 2 in its 480i output just don't look very good in today's age, in comparison to the same game that would be available on the original Xbox and the Nintendo GameCube. So if you are considering purchasing a PlayStation 2 console with a good library of games, you may want to avoid the majority of the multi-platform titles, as they are the worst versions of those particular games. And that is why I am only recommending the PlayStation 2 console on the basis of its exclusive titles. Personally, I prefer the Xbox because it's got the games that I want to play. There are a lot of obscure titles for the PlayStation 2, but I guarantee that there's going to be at least a couple of games in there that you haven't heard of, and you will thoroughly enjoy them. The PlayStation 2 may not have the best graphical grunt or the best versions of multi-format titles, but with a game library that boasts this many gaming classics and memorable gaming moments from the early 2000s, the PlayStation 2 is a worthwhile gaming investment. It's very cheap, accessible, plus fully backwards compatible with every single game in the PlayStation 1 library, and the games are very affordable and easy to track down. The PlayStation 2 is a worthwhile piece of gaming history, and you would be a fool to not at least try out its excellent gaming library.
Rated M for mature. Where is he?
Shinobi's back!
Sega!